Good evening, I'm Gabe Gutierrez in for Tom. We begin top story tonight with the record COVID surge. The nation's starting to look eerily similar to last winter. Massive lines for testing across the country and many mask mandates going back into effect. Schools and businesses also closing. New York, once the COVID epicenter early on, now reporting more than 21,000 cases in a single day, the highest since the pandemic began. The famed Radio City Rockettes canceling the rest of their season 1 week before Christmas Eve. The NFL also postponing at least 3 games this weekend after more than 100 players ended up on the COVID reserve list. Deaths and hospitalizations also spiking. Ohio's governor now sending in the National Guard to help overwhelmed ICUs. The White House COVID task force saying the time to get a booster is now. But more than 90 million Americans still have not received even one shot. There's also news tonight on vaccines for children under 5. Let's get right to NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer.
Well before our nation has even reached what's predicted to be the depths of this year's deadly winter surge, businesses, venues, and schools are shuttering in pockets of the country. Today, New York State recording its single-day record for new infections during the pandemic, though hospitalizations are down by more than half. Still, a week before Christmas, the Rockettes are canceling the rest of this season's shows. Today, the NFL and NHL postponing some games after a cluster of outbreaks. Parts of Broadway are dark, and as restaurants and classrooms clear out, long lines for COVID testing are back. With our past resembling our future, the 91 million Americans who are not inoculated are accelerating the pandemic.
For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death. For yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm.
Vaccinations will protect most from serious illness, but today the COVID task force emphasized the critical need for boosters. As Omicron evades some layers of protection, scientists are worried about what will evolve next.
We are concerned that we are 1 or 2 mutations away from not having effective vaccines or monoclonal antibody therapies.
With many hospitals already on the brink, Ohio's governor is sending in the National Guard to help. The pandemic also taking a toll on nurses, with a new study showing 1 in 5 plan to quit the profession.
We're tired, the hospitals are stretched, resilience is low. Please get vaccinated.
I think we're looking at a potential wave of cases that's so large that we still, overwhelm our hospitals.
So there's some danger ahead.
I think there is.
Bracing for a winter wave expected to rival last year's, every day 1,300 Americans lose their lives.
All of these rooms are full.
All of these rooms are full of intubated COVID patients.
To see the grim reality, look no further than Farmington, New Mexico. 2 weeks ago, we saw their ICUs were full. Today, local funeral homes tell us they're now running out of room to hold the dead.
And Miguel Almaguer joins us now from Los Angeles. Miguel, Pfizer is announcing a delay for vaccine trials for children under 5.
That's right, Gabe. Pfizer says they're testing a 3rd dose of their vaccine in an ongoing trial for kids under 5 after the company found out 2 doses didn't generate a strong enough immune response. Pfizer likely won't have data to submit to the FDA until the first half of 2022. Gabe?
Miguel, thank you. Turning now to New York City, once the epicenter of the pandemic, now seeing a resurgence in cases. MSNBC's Lindsay Reiser spoke to New Yorkers in line for COVID tests and once again worried for their safety.
At COVID testing sites across New York City, long lines have returned.
So how do you feel about this long line?
Very long wait, but we're happy to wait. I think very important at the moment with the current rising pandemic rate.
The Omicron variant fueling a new surge in cases. 21,000 new cases Thursday across the state, a pandemic record.
We have seen a very substantial increase in COVID cases in the last few days. And it is clear that the Omicron variant is here in New York City in full force.
Throughout the New York metro region, the CDC estimates 13% of positive cases were the Omicron variant last week, up from 2% the week before, and about 4 times the national average. Now it seems like things are accelerating quickly. Many New Yorkers now knowing someone who was recently exposed or has tested positive.
One of my coworkers was diagnosed with COVID, and with the upcoming holidays, I just thought it was the prudent thing to do.
This line here in Midtown Manhattan is about 2 hours long. Many, if not most of the people are waiting to get tested. And we saw people waiting before 6 this morning. The place opened at 7. This isn't the only one. We're seeing lines like this throughout the city. And it's not just long lines at testing sites where Omicron's impact is being felt. Some restaurants are closing again after breakthrough infections.
The safety of our staff, of our family members that work there, that's our biggest priority.
That move, a tough choice for restaurants that were just seeing a return to normal New York holiday crowds, now fearing a hit to their bottom line.
So this week is done. It's wiped out.
Suddenly, other crowds for testing. Eerie echoes of the first wave, with the holidays quickly approaching. Some residents already reevaluating their plans.
Since the news of the spike in New York City, I've actually canceled plans to go to 2 different shows prior to Christmas. I just want to make sure that I can safely see my family this holiday.
The city will be giving out 500,000 rapid at-home tests and about 1 million masks to community centers. They're also going to be expanding hours at testing sites and opening new ones to try and help with these long lines. Gabe?
Lindsay, thank you. The spike in COVID cases causing major anxiety among families across the country as they prepare for holiday travel. 8 days before Christmas, many people saying they don't expect to change their plans, but they are concerned. Stephanie Gosk has more.
At airports, travelers are taking to the skies. Some worried about the latest surge.
I'm very concerned about it because the flights are full. Inside the lobby is full. On the planes are full.
While others are unfazed.
I already got vaccinated. Not really worried about it.
So far, there is no sign that the rising cases have impacted people's decision to travel. AAA estimates airlines are seeing nearly 3 times the number of passengers compared to last year. And it projects 100 million people will travel 50 miles or more over the holidays, driving or flying. With all these people on the move, health officials are banging a familiar drum.
Get vaccinated. If you're eligible for a boost, get boosted.
For those who are, here's some advice. Are small gatherings okay?
You can get together with your relatives over the holidays. Adding rapid tests will make that even safer.
What about indoor dining at restaurants? That's a bit murky.
Everything we're going to be doing involves individuals' risk tolerance, and some people may decide certain exposures just aren't worth it.
And what should unvaccinated people do?
People are going to have to continue to use masks and tests and other measures.
And most importantly, she says, reconsider getting vaccinated.
And Stephanie Goss joins us now from New York. Stephanie, we see another line behind you. And what additional precautions are people taking before they travel?
Well, in a lot of cases, Gabe, especially if you're traveling overseas, you've got to get a COVID test. And, you know, these lines in New York City are getting really long. It goes all the way around the corner. And I talked to people right at the front of it. They said they were waiting for 2 hours to get a COVID test. I thought that they were all traveling overseas trying to get tests. But you know what? I talked to them, Gabe, and a good portion of the people in this line say they are sick. They're feeling symptoms. They need a test. You know, the other option is getting an at-home test sold in pharmacies. But if you see them, stock up because they are going fast, Gabe.
Stephanie, thank you. With COVID cases once again surging around the country, many people are anxious about what's ahead this winter. So NBC News medical contributor Dr. Vin Gupta joins us now. And Dr. Gupta, for people who are still hoping to travel, what are some of the best practices before hitting the road or heading to an airport?
Okay, good evening. If you haven't gotten your 3rd shot yet, now we're talking about that additional shot. In the case of those 1-shot J&Jers, your 2nd shot, you still have time, even if you're leaving sometime next week, because we know that that additional shot takes some effect within the first 48 hours. You need about 2 weeks to have the full effect, but get that shot as quickly as possible. It's the most important thing you can do for safe travel. I would also recommend that the place to be most vigilant and mindful is, say, the train station or the airport itself as you're boarding your flight or as you're boarding your train, because that's when distancing is hard to do. You want to make sure that you're wearing a KN95 mask or something that's multi-layered cloth mask, well-fitting, both for yourself and, say, kiddos that cannot be yet vaccinated. The best mask for a kid is the one that they will wear. And then when you're on the plane, I feel everybody should be rest assured. I highly encourage plane travel if you're thinking about traveling, and you can take a flight and that's possible, you should do it because there's a lot of great ventilation happening. And then on the back end, if you're visiting grandma, grandpa, if you're visiting somebody with cancer who's on active chemotherapy or high dose of steroids, somebody who's high risk, that's where I would say test yourself and kiddos that are yet to be vaccinated before you expose them to yourself unmasked. Just because anybody who is likely to end up in the hospital with serious breakthrough illness is somebody who's older or otherwise high risk. So those are the key criteria here.
So Dr. Gupta, you mentioned masks, and a lot of people are talking about that. There's still a lot we don't know about Omicron, but should people think about upgrading from like a cloth mask to, say, a KN95 perhaps?
You know, KN95 mask to me is well-fitting. It has great filtration capabilities, and I would highly recommend that. And now we know that, Gabe, initially, early in the pandemic, there were issues on quality. Those have been rectified. So you can go to any online realtor and be able to get a box of KN95 masks with confidence, knowing that those are the real thing. But a 3-layered cloth mask that is well-fitting, has zip ties around the ears, also really, really effective, maybe slightly less effective than KN95, but it's a great alternative. So I wouldn't worry too much about that upgrade if you can't do it before your flight, because a 3-layer cloth mask is pretty darn good.
And Dr. Gupta, while we are seeing record cases in parts of the country, the Omicron variant seems milder in terms of symptoms, at least at this point. The hospitalization rate doesn't seem to be as high, right?
You know, interesting data today out of South Africa suggesting, and those that are 60 and older tend to be vaccinated in South Africa. That 60 and older group, rates of hospitalizations are actually quite much lower than they were, Gabe, during the height of the Delta wave. So that, to me, is the key piece. Amongst those that are high risk, amongst those that are vaccinated, what are we seeing? We know that people are testing positive even if you're fully vaxxed. That's expected. But amongst those people that are fully vaxxed, especially high-risk fully vaxxed, are they ending up in the hospital if they're exposed? The answer is no. We're really not seeing that, which is really reassuring.
Dr. Gupta, thank you. Coming up in our next half hour, we'll look at the impact this latest outbreak is having on the sports world. Next on Top Story, Kim Potter, the suburban Minneapolis police officer who shot and killed Daunte Wright in April, taking the stand at her trial, at times breaking down during her testimony, detailing how the traffic stop turned fatal. Here's Ron Allen.
We were trying to keep him from driving away. It just went chaotic.
Former Officer Kimberly Potter testifying in her own defense about the traffic stop that led to her shooting and killing Daunte Wright.
I remember yelling, "Taser, taser, taser," and nothing happened. And then he told me I shot him.
Potter said she thought her gun was her taser, and that while police had stopped Wright for an illegal air freshener and expired license plates, they tried to arrest him when a records check revealed an outstanding arrest warrant for a case involving a weapon. Potter testifying she feared for the safety of another officer on the passenger side, partially inside the car, if Wright drove off and dragged him.
He had a look of fear on his face. It's nothing I'd seen before.
Defense attorneys trying to convince the jury Potter made an innocent mistake, and that even so, her use of deadly force was justified.
I'm so sorry.
Under cross-examination, prosecutors highlighted Potter's 26 years of experience and training, the differences between a gun and a taser, trying to convince the jury she was reckless and had no reason to use either weapon.
You didn't plan to use deadly force that day, did you?
No.
You didn't want to use deadly force, did you?
The objection is overruled.
No.
Because you knew that deadly force was unreasonable and unwarranted in those circumstances.
I didn't want to hurt anybody.
And Ron Allen joins us now from Minneapolis. Ron, Daunte Wright's family also watched Potter testify. How did they react?
There was a moment when his mother was sitting with a member of the clergy, and she could be seen sobbing at the time when Potter was saying she was sorry and just sobbing herself. A lot of emotion, Gabe. And this evening, the family of Wright has released a statement through their attorney saying that they hope the jury doesn't misplace their sympathy for Potter, given how emotional she was. They say the focus should be on the loss of Daunte Wright and the fact that his family is about to face a holiday season without him. And of course, they're hoping that all of this ends in justice for the Wright family. Gabe?
Ron, thanks. We turn now to another high-profile case, the trial of Gayle Maxwell, accused of sex trafficking. The former British socialite speaking for the first time in court today, telling the judge she would not take the stand in her own defense. Tom Winter has the latest.
Tonight, Gayle Maxwell speaking in court for the first time since her high-profile trial began, declining to testify in her own defense, telling the judge, "Your Honor, the government has not proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt, and so there's no reason for me to testify."
Maxwell faces charges of perjury, and there are other credibility issues that the government would skewer her on the stand with.
The former British socialite charged with 6 sex-related trafficking counts, pleading not guilty to all of them. Earlier in the day, Eva Dubin, Epstein's one-time girlfriend, taking the stand for the defense. She's the convicted sex offender's former girlfriend of more than a decade, telling the jury she was never involved in group sex or group sexualized massages with Epstein and alleged victim Jane, who testified earlier this month. Dubin told the jury she has a medical condition that's impacting her memory. Michelle Healy, a former employee of Epstein, took the stand after Dubin, saying she met Jane but never took part in any sexual activity with her. Using only first names, Jane previously testified that women named Eva and Michelle took part in the sexual abuse that occurred at Epstein's Palm Beach mansion, starting when she was just 14.
If the testimony is complicated or cumbersome, that works in favor of the defense. They don't have the burden of proof. They will tell the jury the government has that burden beyond a reasonable doubt. So the more complicated, the better it is for the defense.
Dubin's testimony a part of the defense's strategy to undermine the statements of 4 alleged victims who say Maxwell lured them into Epstein's alleged sex trafficking ring, while the prosecution tries to prove Maxwell wasn't just an innocent bystander to Epstein's abuse, she helped facilitate and participate in it.
The prosecution's strategy is to put the now dead Jeffrey Epstein on trial and show that Maxwell was so associated with him and so involved in his abuse that she either knew, should have known, or directly participated in that abuse.
And Tom Winter joins us now from Lower Manhattan. As we saw there in your piece, Tom, Gayle Maxwell speaking in court for the first time. What else can you tell us about that moment? You were in the courthouse.
Well, she stood up and very clearly she was prepared to say what she was going to say. Every time that a trial comes to the end, from the defense's perspective, the judge has to ask them, do you want to testify? Do you understand the ramifications? She clearly knew what she was going to say. In her British accent, very strong, said, look, I don't think the government's proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and I'm not going to testify, Gabe.
And Tom, how much longer is this trial expected to take?
So at this point, it's just down to the closing arguments, which will begin on Monday at 9 a.m. sharp. We'll hear from the government, then we'll hear from the defense. The government then has an opportunity to provide a rebuttal. That should only last about 45 minutes. Then the jury will receive their instructions as to how they're to proceed, and deliberations might end as late as 6 p.m. on Monday. But by Tuesday, the jurors will be in the room deciding Gayle Maxwell's fate. And I think, Gabe, we're going to get a verdict here probably before Christmas.
Tom, thanks. Now to the investigation into that deadly shooting on the set of the Alec Baldwin movie, Rust. Authorities issuing a search warrant for the actor's phone, saying it may hold clues about the death of the cinematographer. Steve Patterson reports.
Actor Alec Baldwin's cell phone, the target of a new search warrant. Authorities want access to the actor's photos, social media accounts, private messages, and even deleted files. The Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office saying in an affidavit that it believes there may be evidence on the phone relating to the death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. In a new statement overnight to NBC News, Baldwin's legal team saying they proactively requested the warrant to protect some of the actor's family and personal information, writing in part, "We are confident that the evidence will show that Mr. Baldwin is not responsible civilly or criminally for what occurred on October 21st, and he continues to cooperate with authorities," adding that they hope the authorities continue to focus on how the live rounds got on the set in the first place. Detectives are giving few hints about what they're looking for, but according to to the search warrant, investigators learned of several emails and text messages about the Rust movie production during interviews with Baldwin and others. Among them, a conversation with the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, before the shooting, in which the actor apparently requested a bigger gun.
Maybe that the evidence sought on Alec Baldwin's phone is not really about the moment of the crime, but instead Alec Baldwin's decisions as a producer and how those might have affected safety on the set.
Helena Hutchins was killed, and director Joel Sousa was wounded when the prop gun Baldwin was holding suddenly fired during rehearsal. In an interview this month, Baldwin told ABC News he never pulled the trigger and denied responsibility.
I feel that someone is responsible for what happened, and I can't say who that is, but I know it's not me.
Hours before the deadly shooting, members of the film's camera crew had walked off set, citing poor working conditions and safety concerns.
Now, I did not observe any safety or security issues at all in the time I was there.
And Steve Patterson joins us now from Los Angeles. Steve, you mentioned the affidavit that the sheriff's office filed explaining what they think could be on Alec Baldwin's phone. Well, what else did we learn from that affidavit?
Well, Gabe, the crux of this is that the affidavit pertains to detail extensive conversations with the armorer on set, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, though it's unclear whether or not there will be a search warrant obtained for her phone as well. We reached out to her legal team. They had no comment. And we should say, so far, no criminal charges have been filed in the case. Gabe?
Steve, thank you. Tonight marks 1 week since that tornado outbreak that devastated several states. I'm just back from Kentucky, and now as many communities start to rebuild, we're taking a closer look at some lessons learned from another town in Kansas that paved its own road to recovery. Today, 2 new deaths from the devastating storms were confirmed in Kentucky, but now only 1 person is reported missing.
The level of destruction we think now is in the billions across Kentucky.
Clara Lutz protected her 2 young grandchildren in a bathtub as the tornado roared through.
I felt the shaking of the house. Next thing I knew, the tub had lifted and it was out of my hands. I couldn't hold on.
Incredibly, they survived. As places like Mayfield begin their massive cleanup efforts, support is pouring in from across the country, including one city that knows what lies ahead all too well. In 2007, an EF5 tornado shredded 95% of Greensburg, Kansas, including the home of Peter and Haley Marks.
Probably for the next 6 months, we were kind of just operating in shock.
We could hear it being ripped away above us.
Dennis McKinney is a former state representative who live on the air described losing his home.
The roof started going off, so I ran down the stairs.
Now, 14 years later,
the tornado is a great leveler. It doesn't matter what your social status is.
With Greensburg essentially a blank slate, it decided to build back green. All of the city's electricity now comes from this wind farm.
We made the commitment that 100% of the power which we provide our residents would come from renewable sources.
This rural town now has an energy-efficient school, a medical center, and city hall. It also became the first city in the U.S. to use all LED streetlights. Literally a road to recovery.
If we could tell all those people that were hit by this tornado one thing, it would be we're all Americans. When times are tough, we stick together. You're not alone.
Perhaps a silver lining after so much loss. And still ahead tonight, actor Chris Noth facing growing accusations. The actor is calling him a sexual predator, saying he was inappropriate to her on the set of Law & Order, and a restraining order filed against him by his former girlfriend. Also, serial killer arrested, the Virginia man accused of killing at least 4 women he met on dating sites. But authorities say there could be more victims. And a monster typhoon leaving parts of the Philippines underwater. The dramatic rescues playing out across that country. Stay with us. We're back now with a bombshell allegations against Sex and the City star Chris Noth. Another woman tonight calling him a sexual predator, accusing him of inappropriate behavior on the set of Law & Order. And NBC News has obtained a restraining order filed against him more than 25 years ago. NBC's Isa Gutierrez has the details.
Tonight, new allegations emerging against the Sex and the City star Chris Noth. Just a day after an explosive story in The Hollywood Reporter, where 2 women accused him of sexual assault. Now, actress Zoe Lister-Jones calling Noth a sexual predator in an Instagram post. In it, she describes working at a nightclub the actor owned, claiming he, quote, was consistently sexually inappropriate with a fellow female promoter.
And that's not just a coincidence.
She also writes about working on the show Law and Order with him, saying he was drunk on set and that he, quote, got close to me, sniffed my neck, and whispered, "You smell good." It comes after 2 women accused Noth of sexual assault in separate alleged incidents from 2004 and 2015. The Hollywood Reporter did not identify the women by name, but said both approached the newspaper independently after seeing recent headlines about Noth and the Sex and the City sequel. NBC News has been unable to independently confirm the allegations or the identity of the women. In a statement, Noth denied the allegations in the article, calling them, quote, categorically false, saying that, quote, no always means no. That is a line I did not cross. The encounters were consensual. It's difficult not to question the timing of these stories coming out. I don't know for certain why they're surfacing now, but I do know this. I did not assault these women. A spokesperson for Noth told NBC News they had no further comment on the new allegations from Lister-Jones.
No cases have been filed criminally or civilly. In regards to the 2004 case, though, it's beyond the statute of limitations, so you can't see a criminal case go forward in regards to that allegation. In regards to the 2015 allegation, that case can go forward if a district attorney's office decides that they want to pursue charges against Chris Noth.
Also resurfacing allegations of misconduct against Noth from decades ago. NBC News obtained this court document from the Los Angeles County Superior Court. Noth's ex-girlfriend filed a restraining order in 1995. The order filed under the subject of domestic violence. The court told NBC News that restraining order was filed 2 months later. When asked about the restraining order, a spokesperson for Noth said no comment. Isa Gutierrez, NBC News.
And when we come back, COVID hits the NFL. The league now postponing multiple games as a growing number of players land on the COVID reserve list. What this could mean for the rest of the season. And the drug epidemic in this country. The U.S. seizing a record 15,000 pounds of fentanyl just this year. The battle now to stop the drugs from crossing into the U.S. from Mexico. That's next. Back now with Top Stories news feed. Authorities in Virginia say they've arrested a suspected serial killer. Police have identified the so-called shopping cart killer as 35-year-old Anthony Robinson. Authorities say they've connected him to the murders of 4 women he met on dating sites. Police say he met the women at motels, killed them, and then transported their remains in shopping carts. Authorities now are looking for more potential victims. A family of 5 hospitalized tonight after they were hit by a pickup truck in Boston. New video shows mangled strollers after police say the truck jumped over a brick wall and onto the sidewalk, hitting a couple and their 3 children. One of the children seriously injured. So far, no charges have been filed against the driver. A Florida man has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for his role in the January 6th insurrection. 44-year-old Robert Palmer of Florida accused of repeatedly attacking Capitol Police with a wooden plank, a metal pole, and a fire extinguisher. It's the longest sentence yet for the Capitol riot. More than 150 people have pleaded guilty for their involvement in the siege. Palmer was the first one to turn himself into the FBI. And cereal giant Kellogg's taking another step to end a months-long strike by its workers. The company announcing it's reached a second deal with a labor union that represents 1,400 of Kellogg's employees. It comes after union members killed the first agreement with the company 2 weeks ago. The strike started in October and will continue until the members sign off on a deal. Continuing with our COVID coverage, sports leagues around the U.S. are feeling the impact of rising positive cases. The NFL postponing 3 of this weekend's games after outbreaks led to more than 150 players on the COVID-19 reserve list in just the past 5 days. The Raiders versus the Browns, Washington versus the Eagles, and Seahawks versus Rams games have all been moved to early next week after the Browns, Washington, and the Rams saw a surge in cases among their players and staff as the NFL updates their COVID protocols. We're now joined by USA Today's Sports Plus senior NFL insider and CBS Sports, Josina Anderson, who broke the news today about the postponements. Now, the NFL knew they had a problem earlier in the week when the Cleveland Browns quarterback and head coach both tested positive. But when did things get more serious? Do you think we're going to see any more postponements this weekend?
Well, it became more serious when the outbreak just became more plentiful, not just with one team, but with multiple teams, as you mentioned. And the league really was trying to resist any change as far as postponement of games like they did in 2020. Really one, to just show that they have learned a lot from the pandemic last year. And also just with the use of vaccinations across the leagues, really wanting to show that their incentivizing of the players was working. But when you start getting into the 100-plus player positive number that you mentioned, which is a record in such a short period of time, at some point, you're going to have to address it, because then it becomes a game integrity issue, whether a team can just field, a proper roster, especially in December football, where the playoffs are on the line. And so they made the bend today, especially after long negotiations with the NFLPA, who went into this season asking the NFL to really modify the protocols at the outset of the season and do daily testing. But it resisted. It did go from 2 weeks to 1 week for fully vaccinated players, and it has maintained that cadence. But this week in North Texas, with the owners' meetings, they did make some adjustments that culminated in the postponements that we see today. So,
Josina, when it comes to the players, does the NFL or the teams have a real handle on who's been fully vaccinated and who's been boosted?
Well, they know who's vaccinated and they know who is boosted, and they also know who is unvaccinated. I really think that the question really comes down to, when is somebody infected? And when there's such a large period of time between testing as there is when you are having fully vaccinated players in the building not being tested, then it allows a large period where you don't know their status. And I do believe, in addition to like the rest of society, with the holidays and the bye weeks in the sports leagues, that in addition to the testing cadence being what I just mentioned, really contributed to this spike happening in the NFL. And it's really curious because even though they've made adjustments, they haven't changed that. And also one thing they did do is make it easier for fully vaccinated players who do test positive to actually test out and come back to games, so long as they have now one negative test instead of two. And as we do know, you're trying to have safety protocols minded, but at the same time run a business. And sometimes those two things intersect but don't go together.
Josina Anderson, thank you so much. Now, switching gears now to frightening threats made on TikTok. Students and teachers on edge today after anonymous threats of school shootings circulated on the social media platform, even closing some schools. Gotti Schwartz has that story.
For schools across the country, a day of heightened alert or canceled classes after posts about vague threats and unsubstantiated rumors of a December 17th attack on schools went viral on TikTok. Local law enforcement agencies and the FBI saying the threats did not seem credible, and TikTok saying it had found no content promoting violence in schools on Friday, but was finding videos discussing this rumor and warning others to stay safe. At least some districts today canceling classes in more than a dozen states, citing an abundance of caution and multiple safety concerns.
Do you think that this is a double-edged sword? You want to be safe when you shut down schools, but on the other hand, you may be giving more credence to something that wasn't true to begin with?
I do. I worry that by shutting down schools and sending out all these emails, we're giving attention to bad behavior that maybe wasn't a threat to begin with.
In Michigan, some districts not taking chances after a student opened fire on his classmates, killing 4 and injuring 11 others last month. In Florida this morning, police arrested a teen with a loaded firearm in his bag at Miramar High School, though it's not yet known if there's any connection to the online threats. Earlier this year, some students shared an online challenge to destroy school property. Experts worry about a larger trend emerging.
What worries me about this particular situation is that we have schools shutting down across the United States today, right? So unfortunately, what we see then is that there's power in spreading misinformation.
Viral posts on social media spiraling into mass fear and real-world disruption.
Gotti Schwartz joining us now live from Los Angeles. And Gotti, what is TikTok doing to discourage dangerous trends like this that, even if they don't materialize, are amplified by their platform?
Yeah, Gabe, it's tough. TikTok says they've been monitoring its site for any sort of content that promotes school violence, and according to their policies, they will take it down immediately. But as we've seen with this trend and with other trends, at times it becomes the very nature of giving any student a potential platform of millions and millions of people. So right now, for example, if you log on to TikTok, you might not see people calling for violence today, but instead see video after video of students saying that they are scared to go to school after these alleged threats. So if you're a student who on one hand is hearing law enforcement say the threats don't seem credible, but on the other hand, it feels like everyone at school is talking about whether an attack is imminent, do you feel safe going to school? Do parents feel safe sending their kids to school? Do administrators feel safe holding class? The bottom line here is that we are seeing major disruptions based on what appear to be rumors at this point. And the question really is whether this kind of cycle of misinformation is going to continue to get worse. Gabe?
Gotti Schwartz live for us in Los Angeles. Gotti, thanks. Now to Top Stories Global Watch, and we begin with the deadly typhoon in the Philippines. New video shows a Coast Guardsman using a bucket to rescue a 1-month-old baby from chest-high floodwaters. A Category 5 storm making 120-mile-an-hour winds, causing widespread damage. At least a dozen people have been killed and nearly 100,000 residents evacuated. To the deadly fire in a hospital in Japan, flames tearing through a psychiatric care clinic in Osaka. More than 24 people killed. The deadliest fire in Japan in 20 years. Authorities say it appears a patient started the fire. And all eyes on Chile ahead of a high-stakes presidential election. Polls showing far-right candidate Jose Antonio Cast and progressive social democrat Gabriel Boric are nearly deadlocked going into Sunday's runoff election. The result expected to bring the most abrupt political shift in the country since it returned to democracy in 1990. Now to the Americas, focusing on stories from the U.S. and Latin America. The DEA announcing it seized more than 15,000 pounds of fentanyl this year, enough, they say, to kill every person in this country. Officials pointing the blame at Mexican drug cartels who are mass producing the synthetic opioids and selling them on social media. Tonight, the DEA warning of an existential threat to the U.S., announcing it seized a record 15,000 pounds of the highly lethal drug fentanyl this year alone.
The amount of fentanyl that the DEA and our law enforcement partners have seized this year is enough to kill every single American.
Fentanyl flooding into the U.S. from Mexico, where drug cartels are mass producing the pills using chemicals largely from China, according to the DEA. The cartels then pushing their deadly products on social media, targeting people of all ages.
Criminal drug traffickers have found a new tool to pump poison into our communities. They have turned our smartphones into a one-click stop to market, to sell, and to deliver deadly drugs.
More than 64,000 people have died of synthetic opioid overdoses this year, the vast majority involving fentanyl. The DEA also seizing more than 20 million fake pills designed to look like prescription drugs, such as Xanax, Adderall, and OxyContin.
With a simple click, as easy as ordering a pizza online, Americans are buying what they think are real medicines. What they are getting is fake pills laced with deadly fentanyl.
Earlier this year, we were out with the Border Patrol near El Paso, Texas. Agents there dealing with a historic number of migrants and a surge of drug smuggling in the desert.
For the first time, fentanyl is being smuggled between the ports of entry.
Fentanyl being pushed in the area is up more than 355% compared to last year and more than 4,000% since 2018. What makes it so easy to smuggle?
The cartels find ways to intimidate migrants and find ways to illegally have them transport that narcotic.
Families like the Capeludos all too familiar with the devastation caused by the influx of deadly opioids. Their 20-year-old daughter, Alexandra, took what she thought was an oxycodone pill in 2019, but it turned out to be fentanyl. She died 2 days before Christmas.
Don't take your kids for granted. Tell them you love them every day. Don't think something like this cannot happen to your family.
And thank you so much for watching Top Story. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in New York. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.